Hurricane Katrina pummels South Louisiana with destructive winds and powerful storm surges, causing levees to break and hospital staffers to scramble.
We had heat up to maybe 110, 120. We had the flood water, hospital seeping from a lot of different places in addition to the sitting water.
We have almost 30 babies here. Some of them are fairly sick, some of them are not too bad. We had a baby born who was quite premature, weighed about 1.5 pounds. Generators were becoming flooded. This high-tech ventilator was no longer working like it should.
The bureaucracy was impeding the evacuation of very critically ill and premature infants, and we were getting very frustrated, frankly.
Funding for this program has been provided by the Riley Family Foundation, a leader in providing resources to keep the public informed about health care issues, and by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting, which provides for the enhancement of many LPB programs.
A dozen hospitals are in the business of delivering and/or treating babies in the New Orleans area. That's as Hurricane Katrina moves toward the Louisiana coastline in late August 2005. The number of patients entering the hospitals drops sharply because of an evacuation order. However, the patients already in the facilities stay put.
It's like, yeah, we're in the hospital, but we're in the hospital, we'll be fine. And especially at how high we were. I had the attitude of that was the best place to be during the hurricane, especially since most people had ridden out hurricanes in New Orleans.
In one respect, the women waiting to deliver their babies and those who haven't been discharged yet are lucky. They are still with their babies. Many couples have to leave their infants in neonatal intensive care units while they travel away from the eye of the storm. The Isbells are among those forced to leave their baby behind. That's because he cannot be disconnected from his heart-lung machine.
Sunday morning or Saturday evening, I'd left to go get supplies to stay. Sandwiches, ice, drinks, as you usually do for a hurricane. And we were pretty intended to stay, and I think the nurses kind of talked us into it and advised us to leave.
It's hard times to leave your son when you know you can't even help him.
Some women nearing their delivery dates wait out the hurricane at the closest hospital that is not in its direct path, Women's Hospital in Baton Rouge. This is one of the few places these women can go if they don't have family members to stay with, or if they can't get into hotels.
FEMA and Red Cross shelters were not accepting women over 34 weeks. And those women also were not allowed to go into the special needs shelter because they didn't fit the definition of a special needs person. So their next shelter was Women's Hospital.
They are near their due date. Naturally, that's the last thing you want to trying to rush to the hospital and labor during the full-blown hurricanes, winds and everything. We made radiology waiting rooms into kind of like a big lounge with mattresses on the floor and those types of things. And we just got all the supplies that we needed, and we felt like that was our obligation.
Hurricane Katrina is packing gales of at least 125 miles per hour as it roars across the Louisiana coastline on Monday morning, August 29th. Many women waiting out the hurricane in Baton Rouge have not fully escaped its path.
Our air conditioning system didn't work. Floors started sweating. The patients were hot. We had to make alternative plans for getting ventilation to them. Our phone system was iffy. Cell phones were iffy and all jammed up. So we were pretty much just sitting here on our own, dependent on bits and pieces of information from other folks.
Woman still has emergency generators supplying power to critical areas of the hospital, the neonatal intensive care unit, and labor and delivery. Full power is restored to the main hospital building late the same day of the hurricane.
We know that a couple of our facilities don't have power back yet, but we'll make arrangements for that. We shut down the emergency command center about 7:30 or 8 o'clock that night, and everybody was going home and coming back to work for a fairly normal day. Pretty much the worst that we anticipated for the next few days was that employees would still have power out. There might be some difficulty getting to work because of downed trees. We've lived through that before with storms every year, and we thought it was just going to be a fairly normal Tuesday.
Things would be anything but normal for the staff at Women's Hospital in the coming days, weeks, and months. By Tuesday morning, the real hurricane damage quickly reveals itself. Wind damage in the New Orleans area, 60 miles southeast of Baton Rouge, is far more serious than perhaps anyone can comprehend. High winds have leveled buildings, blown out windows, and toppled trees and utility poles.
It's just been a nightmare. Just holy hell. I don't wish that on anybody. They say hurricane, you gotta go. You gotta go.
All of the large pane windows burst. Even some of the normal size, they had shatters in them.
It will take a lot longer than 10 hours for hospitals in this city to recover electricity. However, some hospital staffers are still optimistic. They can make it on their own.
East Jefferson has generators, so we were okay. We were fairly comfortable here because the NICU was one of the necessity units that did have air conditioning and lighting.
Hospital staffers soon realize the wind damage pales in comparison to water damage that's about to pour in. Levees are breaking, spilling as much as 15 feet of water in some parts of the city. It's flooding just about every structure that is not part of the earliest settlements built on higher ground. Most of the hospitals are in the same situation as homes. They are surrounded by water.
You couldn't exit the hospital unless you were exiting by boat or by helicopter because it had flooded up to the lobby, which sat at least 3 feet off of the street.
Young Shavante Hilton is literally giving birth as she tries to stay above the rising water.
We went to school, stayed there. We went everywhere. We was just trying to get out the water. And we was finally about to leave, and my water had busted, and we was trying to get a helicopter, but none ain't stopped for us. So they had to push us all in the boat. They had to put the little children in the boat too. But they were saying the boat was about to sink or something, so all the children had to get out, and I had to get in another boat.
She was having contractions, so we had like a little floating bed. It was like a little kid floater, and we just put on it.
I just thought it was over for me. Then I don't know these people. We had to go from the I-10 all the way around St. Charles. Just know he was coming. I was like, and they was just trying to rush and was trying to get me there. And then we went to the man truck, and he had to load the people up, and he just put me in the truck.
As soon as we got in front of the place, baby was coming, so we just, had the baby right there on the truck, and two police officers came over there, and he put her in the back of his truck, and she's actually in the hospital right now in another room. I never delivered a baby before, but none of us did. And it was an experience because, it was late. Everybody was just like, what we gonna do? But, what else can you do? You gotta stick together.
Larry Thomas had already been cut by flying glass before running across Shavante Hilton. Over at Memorial Hospital, Kimba White Dupree delivers her baby under much better conditions. But the situation is far from ideal.
I delivered him at 3:03 a.m. on Tuesday morning. So the storm had passed. The power was out by this time. But we're on generator power. And I was actually able to get the epidural. I was 7 centimeters dilated, but I still was able to get it. And they were able to operate all of the machines to keep patients who couldn't breathe on their own running. So at this point, we're not panicking. But the question is, how long is this going to last?
The longer the power outages, the more uncomfortable it becomes.
It was extremely hot. There was no power, no emergency power, no regular power. We had heat up to maybe 110, 120. We had limited water, we had limited food, we had a lot of people in the hospital, we had no bathroom facilities. And then we had the flood water, hospital seeping from a lot of different places in addition to the sitting water, moving patients, lack of space for staff.
The biggest stress is the fact that we're all here under pretty adverse circumstances. We're all pretty hot because it's pretty warm in here for us. Most of the time for these little babies, we're struggling to keep them warm. In this case, we don't have to supply as much external heat to keep them warm because the ambient temperature is warm enough.
Some hospital staffers soon realized the city is not a safe place for their babies.
Monday night came and the power became unreliable. The generators were becoming flooded and we were losing power, and this high-tech ventilator was no longer working like it should. Realizing these kids couldn't survive long this way, we made a decision internally to do what we could to get the kids out.
A couple of us came in early Tuesday morning just because it was difficult to sleep at home without power, and that's when we began to learn about what was going on in New Orleans. First call was from a hospital in New Orleans, wanted to know if we could take 20 or so of their infants. We'd originally told that hospital that they had to go through the regional OEP.
The state's relief plan calls for the Office of Emergency Preparedness to coordinate the evacuation of some of the hospitals in the Crescent City. But the process depends heavily on telephone calls between Baton Rouge and New Orleans hospitals, as well as the State Office of Emergency Preparedness.
Well, calls weren't working real well. Cell phones weren't working, landlines weren't working. And of course, then after the storm went through, all of the microwave towers were down. So in order for me to make a simple telephone call over to the Office of Emergency Preparedness, for example, sometimes took 8, 10, 12 tries on a cell phone.
The telephone troubles are not only aggravating hospital executives, they are also frustrating parents who have had to leave their sick babies behind.
We were having a hard time getting through to the hospital. We would go hours and hours and hours without hearing from them. So finally they would start calling us, and it was different nurses that, would call and just let us know, that they're okay, he's okay.
There is yet another barrier that is perhaps more challenging than reaching people on the telephone.
There were a number of people that needed to be evacuated from New Orleans. It wasn't just in hospitals, it was nursing homes, people on rooftops, people stranded in the convention center and the Superdome and on the interstate. So we also felt that if we could accept responsibility for one segment of the people that needed to be evacuated, then that would be one less thing that the other individuals would need to be responsible for.
So we checked with Dr. Steve Spadell, our chief of neonatology, and he said, yeah, let's see if we can help more than we're currently helping. So we hopped in a car and ran over to the State Office of Emergency Preparedness and found Dr. Jimmy Guidry, the state health officer, and we said, Dr. Guidry, we know all those people in New Orleans. Why don't you just let us take over this job of coordinating these transports? And he said just a very few words. He looked up and said, God bless you. So from that point on, we went on and we just acted like we had the power.
With this move, Woman's Hospital puts itself in the position of managing the evacuation of most of the expectant mothers and sick babies from a dozen hospitals in and around New Orleans.
I had electricity, I had staff, I had supplies. I had a lot more babies, but I had what I needed to take care of those babies.
Woman's does have electricity, but does it have the transportation to rescue more than 100 stranded babies? A staff that is willing to take care of more than twice its normal patient load, and the complex equipment necessary to keep some of the sickest babies in the state alive? Do staffers really know what it will take to care for people who have lost everything they had?
I'm just trying to recuperate now.
As long as you have people that agree with the decision, then you can do anything you want.
The first step is, of course, to get the babies out of New Orleans. Woman's executives soon realize they are competing with many other organizations to get the people and resources needed. To complicate the situation even further, some of the babies are in hospitals surrounded by water.
We talked with the head of the Texas and Louisiana Wildlife and Fisheries Commission, and they were willing to pull boats off of other events that they had going on, and the Black Hawk helicopters were waiting in line. Everyone wanted to make sure the babies were saved.
We'd hear the helicopters coming and we'd get the calls, and they would just go en masse up to the helicopter pad, and one helicopter would land and we'd take babies off, that one would take off, and another one would be hovering here and would come in and land.
You know the opening scenes of MASH when you hear the helicopter coming? That's how it was here. We oftentimes would have helicopters landing that we had no idea that they were coming. And we had a lot of false alarms. People think they would hear a helicopter, so we'd all run to the helipad and get up there, and we'd stand there. You know, it was hot, and we're standing there sweating, looking for helicopters, and there's no helicopters coming.
One pilot even lands his chopper in the middle of the woman's hospital driveway after seeing 2 other choppers on the helipad. The pilot fears the 3 choppers will cause the helipad to crash through the roof.
We also received some babies via river barge, we understand, from one of the hospitals down there. We went down to New Orleans in Acadian ambulances. We coordinated with the State Office of Emergency Preparedness to get those. We sent our transport teams down. Those people were extraordinary. Some of them went 2 or 3, 4 times.
The nurse practitioners, nurses, and paramedics on the transport teams soon realized that just getting to the hospitals is a major challenge. Part of the interstate has been blown or washed away. They also run into flooded roads, toppled trees, scattered building materials, and other debris.
The 2 girls that I was with were from New Orleans, and they kind of knew where we were, and they were telling us, you know, try going this way, try and going that way, and look, I guess they're going this route. And then part of the drive, we were driving on the sidewalk, trying to get around trees. There were gunshots being fired in the vicinity of the hospital we were trying to get to. That's what took us so long to get there. We waited for a while, surrounded by armed troopers and National Guardsmen, and they arranged for a SWAT team to surround us when we got to the hospital.
There are times when Woman's Hospital gets lucky. Other hospitals figure out ways to get their babies to Baton Rouge on their own.
We had to get car seats for all 12 babies because not everybody had car seats in the NI because we didn't think they were going to be going home yet. So we got some car seats from our well baby moms. Every baby had monitors. We had packed up a bag for every baby with formula, diapers, anything that we needed in a transport. And it was about 5 a.m. when we finally got all 12 babies in the ambulances off to Baton Rouge.
And clearly the babies were transported in ways we don't normally do, with multiple babies in one crib. Babies that normally would be on a ventilator with a machine breathing for them, people were breathing for them by hand. So they all came in different ways. We even had 2 babies come in their physician's car.
My son was taken out, was actually one of the first babies to get out of the hospital. And what we thought they were transporting them out in their incubators, we later found out that the nurses had to put them inside their shirt to keep them warm and handbag them to keep them breathing. He was 3 months early, 12 weeks, 1 day shy of 28 weeks.
I don't think anyone really understood the magnitude. It was just constant. You kept thinking everybody's got to be out of New Orleans by now. The hospitals have to all be evacuated, and there'd still be more coming.
We're bringing babies in from all the hospitals in New Orleans. We're using any means of transportation that we can find, from sheets to blankets to isolates to, I've even heard reports of shoe boxes being used to put the babies in to transport them up here.
Some paramedics have to test their own medical skills as they rush patients to the hospital.
We were on station maybe 5 minutes when someone came running outside asking if we could take a pregnant mother to Baton Rouge. They informed us that she was pregnant with twins and delivery would be imminent. Mom was in some distress. She was extremely uncomfortable. She was in a lot of pain. She was dehydrated from being stuck in the attic for 2 or 3 days before they were able to poke a hole and draw attention to themselves. They were rescued by one of the helicopters in the area and taken to the airport. By the grace of God, I've never ever had to deliver a child in the field. I was worried. We were, 40 some odd miles from Baton Rouge. And delivery imminent. I was scared. The first little guy, he was a trooper, came out, textbook, he was beautiful. The second one presented with a foot, at which time we knew we were in trouble. We did everything as we were trained to do, tried to keep Mom calm. We didn't want her to push and strain the baby, get it into a position where we couldn't do anything. The baby was coming one way or another. Mom couldn't stop pushing, at which point the child started turning black. And that's when we got scared. very scared for both the baby and the mother. We knew it wasn't getting oxygen, the cords were trapped. We had to force the delivery and actually pull the child out.
Despite women's growing population, the chief of neonatology is still confident the situation is manageable.
Our nursery is actually the largest NICU in the state. About 15 to 16% of all births in Louisiana happen at Women's Hospital, so we have over 8,000 births a year. When the storm came, we just really kind of did a lot more of what we normally do. We just opened a new nursery. We had not demolished the old nursery yet, so we had plenty of beds.
There is one baby who isn't able to leave New Orleans with the others, little Hayden Isbell.
Most of the babies who are here either have an IV or simple monitoring. Some are on the ventilator. If they're on just a conventional ventilator, we can connect that to an oxygen source in a bag and basically squeeze the bag to ventilate for him during the course of the move. For this patient, he would not be stable on just the ventilator, so he had to be on the ECMO support as well, which required the constant flow of gas as well as the supply to the pump.
7 caregivers are needed just to transfer Hayden from the 10th to the 2nd floor at Ochsner's.
The whole process maybe took about 20 minutes or so, because we can only take baby steps.
Amid the power outage at Ochsner, a generator fuels Hayden's ECMO machine. Back at Women's Hospital, the push continues to keep up with the needs of every baby arriving in the hospital. Women's checks the vital signs on all of the babies. It keeps the sickest ones and transfers any overflow to other hospitals throughout the state. Most are not healthy newborns. They are among the sickest babies in the state. The infants were considered too ill to be checked out of hospitals as the hurricane approached. These infants have to be closely monitored by doctors and nurses 24 hours a day, which means long days for the women's nurses. Fortunately, administrators have a jump on the situation because of an emergency drill they performed about a year before the real disaster.
We discovered that some of our equipment and supplies and rooms didn't perform like we thought they would. So the process of actually doing the drill changed our plan. When we had the influx of patients, I had to make decisions quickly about where to put patients, where to put staff, what kind of equipment we had, and because we had been through that practice drill, I really knew what types of equipment we had available.
These are the kids I'm looking for now. Brimmer, Early Cut, Abram.
All of these babies had problems of some sort, whether it was feeding problems that they were getting ready to go home or more severe problems that required ventilation, nitric oxide therapy, or other therapies. Several of them actually even had surgery shortly after they arrived.
We were not sure as to if we were going to be able to keep up, but knew that we had to because there was no other place for these moms and babies to go. And we knew we were going to take the best care of them possible.
Our staff just pulled together like clockwork. Many of them working 16-hour shifts, coming back the next morning doing double backs.
Our employees donated clothing, formula, diapers. Many companies donated supplies. We received extra equipment, medical equipment, bassinets, monitors, that sort of thing, from the hospitals as the infants were evacuated, as well as from hospitals all over the country that really wanted to help.
The hospital is not only maneuvering to accommodate the babies, it is also scrambling to take care of a huge number of pregnant women. Some are just scared. Some are having complications. Others are in labor. Sometimes the labor is premature. The patient load at Women's is so heavy, doctors and nurses can barely keep up despite very long hours.
You're looking at probably spending another 5-6 extra hours here simply because of the number of ladies that you're suddenly seeing and having to take care of. I'm getting in closer to 11 or 12, sleeping, getting back up 6:30, 7 o'clock and coming back to the hospital.
For doctors and nurses at Women's Hospital, there is no greater donation than that of healthcare workers who give up their time, especially those from the New Orleans area.
I don't know how we would have made it without Dr. Kennedy and his group because he was phenomenal. They came right in. We welcomed them with open arms. We were so grateful to have an additional set of hands.
Patients from New Orleans are just as happy to see the New Orleans doctors.
Some of them started crying. To come here and it's strange surroundings, you don't know much about the city, and to see a familiar face, especially your physician, it's like a life raft has been thrown to you, so to speak.
What we were trying to do is relieve the burden on the physicians there, because they were already seeing an increased load of patients in their office and through the hospital before we started this, and so they were already overworked. We wanted to try to relieve their burden, and plus, you know, when you're doing something, you feel better about a situation. You don't feel so helpless.
Most local physicians are just as giving.
Pretty good, lady.
I remember seeing a physician. She was coming through the hallway, and I told her about this one doctor that was down there trying to manage this volume of patients. And I just asked her, you know, would you mind going and helping? She never hesitated. She picked up the phone. She canceled everything she had to do. She asked her husband to bring her some clothes, and she just jumped in and did what she had to do. And that's pretty much how the entire medical staff responded.
This is what we went into medicine for. This is the purest form of medicine, just taking care of patients without worrying about the bureaucracies, without having to worry about transfer rules and regulations and whatever you have to deal with. This is medicine at its purest. You throw away the rule books, you throw away the procedures, and you just take care of people.
One of the key ideas, I think, that kind of took hold during the storm was that common sense trumps policies and procedures every single time. So we just relied on people to use their common sense and to do things on behalf of folks.
Quick responses from healthcare workers help stave off long-term risks to the patients.
Most of these women were for a long time without food or water. Dehydration increases contraction rates. I really believe that a lot of these ladies, they had mild blood pressure problems before. All the stress they'd been through accelerated their blood pressure problems. So a lot of them had toxemia, preeclampsia, as we know it. And it's a disease that occurs mainly at the end of pregnancy. And you see elevated blood pressure, severe swelling or edema, and you can get extreme protein in the urine, and even as far as abnormal liver function tests can affect the liver. So this is a disease that can affect the liver, the kidneys. Complications of it could be stroke, loss of the pregnancy, stillbirth. So it can, if not under control and appropriately taken care of, it can accelerate to very disastrous complications. Once you get to a certain state of this disease, you have to deliver the mother to, number one, to get the mother to recover, and two, the situation, the environment inside the uterus is so terrible that it's not conducive for the baby to grow and develop and can be actually harmful to the baby.
Doctors are not only concerned about the physical health of the women, they also want to help them achieve emotional ease.
Every woman has an intimate relationship with their OBGYN, especially during pregnancy. Whether the OBGYN is male, female, you connect with them. And these women were not just coming in labor to a doctor that was in their doctor's call group and in the hospital they expected to deliver in, and under the situation with family around. They were being transported to a totally different city, a hospital they had no idea, and seeing strange faces and brought into the emergency room and not knowing maybe where their children were, not knowing how their belongings, their possessions, what they were going to come back to, if anything. My connection was being from New Orleans and knowing some of the places and the different landmarks and talking about how I had gone through when I was young Hurricane Betsy and some of the things we went through with Hurricane Betsy, and you could say, okay, the city bounced back after that, it's going to be okay, and it's just those little things, those little mild touches that put them a little bit at ease as much as possible.
When you do what we do, it's about caring all the time. This was about caring for people who had needs beyond what we're normally seeing, who had certainly needs for physical care, but who needed emotional support, who needed to know that people cared about them, that there was going to be a future, that there was something beyond the horrific that they had been living through for the last several days.
No one knew where their families were. So we had teenage mothers, we had 17, 18-year-olds who were pregnant, had no idea where their mothers were, where their boyfriends or husbands were. Everyone got separated. They took the medically needy folks out of New Orleans first, and so then the rest of the families were put on buses and different modes of transportation to get out and went all over the United States.
Understand that in the chaos of moving these babies from the hospitals in New Orleans, there was no time, nor was there communication to get to the parents to say, we're taking your baby to Women's Hospital. During that time, we admitted well over 100 and some babies alone. and well over 180 some moms.
Our social services department did a phenomenal job at, for one thing, making sure the families got reconnected. We just fielded thousands of calls to do that. So we first, had to reunite the families, and then second had to make sure that they had support systems, whether it be social services or referral to other agencies, where they could have the time to develop as a family unit. Babies are demanding little critters, and we had to have the time for them to be able to have the physical and emotional ties that are going to see them through parenthood.
Everyone gets caught up in the emotions of seeing parents and babies reunited. The separation has been horrific for many parents.
We had a patient who was an OB patient. She had delivered, was evacuated from, I think, Baptist Hospital, and was at the convention center. The baby had been transferred to a women's hospital prior to that, and she and her husband wanted to get out. So they walked across the Crescent City Connection, the Greater New Orleans Bridge, over to Algiers, hitchhiked 2 rides to their home, which was on the West Bank, and then drove to Baton Rouge. So this was a lady 5 days post-op who just walking up those ramps over that bridge. So she walked a few miles 5 days post-op. So these people were determined to get out of there. They wanted to get to where the baby was.
The most touching story that I can remember was the mom who was pregnant, was preterm, had to swim in order to get help for her 5-year-old who was an asthmatic. She was here, she came into this nursery, she delivered, her baby stayed with us, and she had no idea where her other son was. And that son ended up in the Astrodome in Houston, Texas. Eventually, throughout the whole experience, we were able to reunite that whole family together.
At one point, I think we had reunited 2 or 3 moms at the same time with their babies, and it must have been about, a good 20 staff people in the room, and there was not a dry eye in the room. Your heart pours out for these mothers, because you not only do you sense the love, but you can feel it. There's just that presence within the room. So you really, really dig deep and begin to feel the love that's really there. And material things do not matter. You realize that family and your association with the family and just that closeness that's there. And then you become actually a community of family. That everybody in the community is really family.
Woman's gets constant reminders it is not alone in the battle to meet the needs of the women and babies coming into the hospital. That human instinct to help each other survive really kicks in when people realize how much help is needed.
Everybody got involved with kind of being there for the patients, taking care of the patients. They had hospital gown. If they were in the hospital when the storm hit, they had their hospital gown. That was all they had. So immediately it was things just to get clothes and toothbrushes.
Several days after the hurricane, 18-wheelers of supplies started showing up on our campus that were donated from a church group in some part of the country or some coalition that we were totally unfamiliar with. It was a pretty amazing reinforcement of the goodness of human beings.
It's interesting because we get lots of sweaters and things for the babies that our babies in the South probably would never really wear very often, but coming from Minnesota and Montana, there are people up there that are knitting blankets and knitting crocheting hats and still sending. We'll get envelopes and boxes full of things that they just wanted to do something.
Charitable organizations and businesses supply Women's with cash cards to department stores and other businesses. These cards are handed out to new mothers who suffered heavy losses during Hurricane Katrina. Just when staffers feel they have all the systems in place to meet the needs of their patients, new problems crop up. Where did the homeless women go who are nearing their delivery dates but have no home to go to? Where can families go with new babies? There are concerns about sending infants into huge shelters that may be filled with germs from floodwaters in New Orleans.
We got on the phone and started talking to the different churches in Baton Rouge, and every church we talked to, everybody we ever talked to through the whole thing, no one said no. Everybody said, sure, we'll do whatever we need to do. So the individual churches set up small shelters for those families where one of the churches even took some of the offices and made them like little suites, and they had baby beds and beds for the mothers and things so the babies could go home with their mothers to a place that was a little more conducive to having a newborn.
The church is not pews and stained glass windows and steeples. The church is made up of people, and God has commissioned us to reach people and to care for people, and that's what they're doing. They're actually living out what being the church truly means.
Some evacuees feel they have encountered racism when trying to get past a mostly white suburb of New Orleans. But it's a different situation altogether at the mostly white churches.
Be candid with me, are they mostly white?
Oh yes. We do have African American who are members of our church, but the majority are white.
And the majority of your people you're housing now
are black.
How's that been?
Been fine.
The teamwork between the churches and the hospital proves invaluable for many of the young mothers, providing them with everything they need for at least a few days.
I came here with nothing at all. Food for my kids, clothes for my kids, clothing for myself. They're real good with the health of the well-being of the babies. They have supplied nurses to come around.
The hospitals and churches are also meeting the needs of extended family members.
I'm her auntie. Yeah, we saw
Saturday.
Yeah, Saturday.
Before the storm. And we hadn't seen her since then.
Our materials management department went out and bought cots for the babies, for the children. And we were able to utilize we had kinder mats and cots and that we put in the room, and we fed the children, and our nurses went home and got their own clothes from their children and brought them back in. We brought games, kept them occupied.
The workload on the staff continues to build with each new patient. Woman's hires 100 displaced New Orleans staffers to help ease the pressure on medical staff and the evacuees.
We made arrangements for them to sleep in the hospital because they might not be able to get to their homes. It wasn't so much wind damage or blocked roads, it was traffic congestion.
Cleaning up or picking up or trying to keep up with the people that were here that were not patients. That was the biggest challenge. We had a number of employees who wanted to stay, so what we did is we worked in shifts. They would work probably 10 to 13 hours, and then they would go take a break, go take a nap, get some rest, and then the person that was sleeping would then come on and work that same shift.
We provided free meals around the clock for about a week to all employees. Many times we took the food on the units when they didn't have time to come down.
It was just constantly preparing. Planning. I mean, we had dietitians, we were pulling from labor pool, we were making coffee in the hallway, trying to keep everybody awake and alert. We did a lot of comfort food. Did jambalayas, gumbos, spaghetti and meat sauce, those kinds of things that are big and bulky and kind of satisfy you when you're hungry and stressed.
Just when the staff at Woman's feels confident that all of the babies from New Orleans have been rescued, a startling and disturbing discovery. 4 days into the tragedy, they learn that charity and university hospitals have not been evacuated.
It's one of the most amazing and relatively untold stories of this whole event is these babies are at our hospital and several hospitals all around town, quite sick, hanging on to life, and then hanging on to life in difficult circumstances.
Doctors at university attempted to get a wildlife and fisheries boat in to transport 2 of their sickest babies when the water started rising. That boat never arrived. However, they were able to transport the babies by canoe to Children's Hospital, where arrangements were made to get the babies out of the city.
The babies who we thought were initially too sick to move by regular means now were going to be gone by boat and fire truck. And we were right adjacent to the Superdome. I could see straight across the helicopters coming and going all day long. We could see the trucks pulling boats on trailers on the interstate right by. So we knew lots of things were going on, but we knew there were concerns about safety in the area.
Staffers in the hospitals witness terrible ordeals from the windows as they rock and cuddle their babies. They see the throngs of stranded people. They see swimmers barely make it to safety. They hear gunshots fired. Some see bodies floating. They watch a dwindling food supply. Some staffers at the charity hospital take to giving each other IVs for nourishment so that the food will go to the patients.
We had a lot of staff who didn't know where their families were. They didn't know what was going on at their home. Some had even gotten phone calls early on into the storm, kind of distress calls. I'm in the attic, I'm in the house, I can't get in touch with anyone, I can't get out. And then not talking to them again for 4 days, 5 days, and so not knowing whatever happened to them. You know, they were working under very, very difficult conditions, not just the physical conditions we were in, but of course the emotional conditions that they had to deal with. But I'm so very proud of them because they were really strong. They were really focused on, I'm going to concentrate on what I can do here today, and then I'm going to deal with the rest of it when I get out. And so they really focused on taking care of those babies, making sure we didn't lose any of them, and everyone getting out safe.
We actually did have what we thought was an evacuation Thursday afternoon underway, and we had nurses and babies loading into a flatboat to be taken to an adjacent hospital to leave. They actually went over to that hospital and actually ended up, it fell through.
Doctors at University Hospital reportedly sent their babies to Tulane Medical Center, about a half-mile away. The doctors working at University say they thought the babies had a better opportunity of being evacuated because of the activity they heard coming from that direction.
Generators down at Tulane, so we have no electricity or any backup. We've already helicoptered out all of the critical care patients, and now we're working on the rest of the patients and their families.
University's babies are not transported with the Tulane patients.
We had just had this failed evacuation attempt at that time, and I surprisingly, I got a call from Steve. I'm not sure how he was able to find the number. We had none of the landlines were working, but he was able to get through on someone's cell phone. And in talking to him, his first question was, "Do you have babies there?" And I said, "Yes, we do." He says, "Well, people have told us that there were no babies left." I said, "Well, I assure you, we have almost 30 babies here. Some of them are fairly sick. Some of them are not too bad, but all of them are running out of time in a sense of supplies and plus high temperatures in the area and such."
By the time boat and/or helicopter transportation is arranged to rescue the infants, it's dark. Authorities conclude it's too risky to attempt a transport under the cover of darkness, which leaves doctors and nurses scrambling for another night. The doctors at University had already delivered 4 babies without full power, but tonight they would face a more urgent situation than they have had to contend with before.
We had a baby born who was quite premature, about 25 weeks gestation, and weighed about 1.5 pounds. I don't know for sure because we had no working scale at this point in time. And we cared for this child overnight, critically ill, without the benefit of laboratory, without the benefit of x-rays. So the urgency actually became increased at this point in time because such a critically ill child can't be managed for long without knowing more of what's going on, information you can get from laboratory, from x-ray studies. After speaking to Dr. Spadell on Thursday afternoon, I was waiting for his call again Friday morning. And while waiting for that call, to let us know how the evacuation might take place, we began to hear lots of noise outside the hospital. The windows were open to provide some relief from the heat. We heard helicopters hovering overhead. We didn't know quite what was going on. We heard lots of loud crashing and splashing. And what was happening was they were clearing the roof of some of the storm debris, throwing it over the side of the hospital, splashing into the floodwaters. Within minutes, the helicopters were there, landing on the roof. And we began quickly to bring our babies from the 3rd floor up to 5 or 6 flights of stairs, carrying the babies and their equipment up there to load on those helicopters. We had waited 4 days to get out of there, but in less than an hour, I believe almost 28 babies were evacuated in less than an hour by helicopters, and this includes babies, nurses, and in a few cases, a few family members.
Nurses from University Hospital take the chopper rides to Women's Hospital to see their babies through the crisis, from start to finish.
Everybody wanted to go with their baby. Everybody wanted to go. And not to get out of the hospital, but they wanted to make sure and see the place they were handing the babies off to. They didn't just want to give it to a military person and hope that the baby made it there okay. Deciding on who was not going to go was very, very difficult. Fortunately, most of them got to go on the transport with their babies. There were 2 or 3 that didn't. And, you know, they cried because they wanted to go and see what happened.
At our hospital, at University Hospital, and at all the hospitals in the area, in the whole metropolitan area of New Orleans, to my knowledge, not one child, not one infant died during this process. I think it's an amazing story.
With the arrival of the women and babies from charity and university hospitals, the patient load at Women's Hospital climbs to 333. This includes the births of 49 infants on the same Friday that the university patients arrive. Despite all the hospital's resources and donations from around the country, Women's still needs more supplies.
We just let our vice presidents know what we needed in the way of maybe extra stretchers, baby warmers, baby cribs, patient beds, those types of things. And once they knew that, they put the word out to our materials management department, and he went into action, and he was able to acquire the equipment that we need in a very short frame of time.
But there are some needs that money can't buy. Many of the women coming into the hospital have had catastrophic experiences and losses. Almost all are carrying very heavy burdens. Their emotions are shattered, and most are suffering from exhaustion.
So how's it been staying here?
Depressing. You know, I just don't want to start over again. I had got comfortable in my life. I got to a place where I was comfortable of living. My kids were going to school. I was going to school and working while I was pregnant. So I don't want to start over, and I know my house is gone. It's gone, so.
You know, a lot of times it was on the news when the patient saw their house underwater, or the patient saw a family member left in New Orleans, and we had patients whose husbands, they had no idea where they were. So for them to experience that, and for the nurses to go through it, we had to give a lot of support, which was draining for us. But just, I guess, again, the way we pulled through was to see each other the next day.
Most of them would work their long hours and cry all the way home. And they would come back and they would do it again and repeat that scenario several days on end.
Our staff is, I think they're doing really well. They certainly don't bring a lot of it to work. They try to focus on the patients, but we want to be very sensitive and aware of what their mental and psychological needs may be, because we need them. We're going to need them for a long time, and because we put them in such a position that we certainly want to be there to help them as much as we were there to help the patients in need.
Some of the doctors treating the patients at Women's are facing losses of their own.
I have lost my uncle in this hurricane, and at that time we weren't able to get in contact with him. We didn't know what the outcome was going to be. And I think that at that time the volume of work kept me moving in such a way that I could maybe feel that if I'm doing this for this patient, maybe someone else is doing this for my uncle somewhere in New Orleans.
Just when it seems Women's has everything needed to manage its overflowing patient load, hospital staffers get another major jolt. There is another hurricane churning toward Louisiana hospitals. Once again, babies are in the hurricane's path, some of the same babies that had been evacuated during Hurricane Katrina. Hurricane Rita forces the evacuation of the 34 babies in hospitals along the Louisiana coastline, from Vermilion Parish to Texas.
When I heard that Rita was coming, I was almost in tears. By that point, we were really maxed out as far as patient volumes and those types of things. That was almost the last straw, so to speak, because it was stressful. It really was. Within several hours, received phone calls from Lake Charles, and we did what we had to do just to fit those patients in. If we couldn't take them, we were able to find hospitals, surrounding hospitals, that they made, provisions for them as well. Unfortunately, there's not that many, that deliver babies.
It's good the babies were evacuated. The hurricane decimated the coast, destroying one hospital and heavily damaging others. Six months after Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, Women's Hospital's patient load is still up by 10%. Administrators credit the staff's endurance to a culture based on the hospital's mission statement.
Our mission is to improve the health of women and infants, and it's just that simple. So we're very focused on that. All of our employees know it. It's short enough, it's easy to remember, and we constantly refer to it.
Most of the hospitals in both Baton Rouge and New Orleans are suffering great financial losses because of Hurricane Katrina.
The state does have some funding that we're trying to recoup, but we decided early on that money was not going to be a factor in providing this care.
All of the hospitals that were able to keep operating say the benefits far outweigh their losses in terms of the preservation of human life and spirit.
What were you thinking, like, during the hurricane when he was here?
A lot. Not knowing if he was okay. Not knowing if this hospital was still going to be here. But he's better now, thanks to Oshner's. If it wasn't for them, I don't even think he would be here.
What's the best thing that happened?
I have my boy, and he's doing extremely well. He's come a long way from 2 pounds, 2.2 ounces. He's 18 pounds and 12 ounces now, and no apparent problems.
At the same time, hospitals know they can't survive if they continue to have to absorb such costs. This has been a learning experience for Woman's, one it hopes other hospitals can learn from as well, not only because of hurricanes, but also because of the risk of earthquakes, explosions, and national security concerns. Most agree communications was a failure.
The satellite phone didn't work. It didn't work consistently. It went out. The ham radio did work, but the communication was so fragmented, it was not good. We had no communications inside of the hospital. To talk to someone, you have to physically walk to where they were. We did a lot of stairs. The hospital was eight floors, 9 flights or 10 when you do basement and roof.
If telephones are operating, hospital workers say it is very important to have them manned properly.
We have dedicated individuals for a variety of services, particularly as it pertains to communication and phone lines. They'll get a lot of phone calls from people looking for family members, looking for their physicians, looking for food and shelter and supplies. People would be wanting to donate. People would be wanting to volunteer. Doctors and nurses from around the country will be showing up at your front door. So have it figured out who's going to handle each one of those situations, because it's not just patients or families you're going to receive, it's a lot of people, because as medical caregivers, we all want to be there and help.
We had a pastor there, and we had a counselor there, and because of the number of people, they were inundated with people who needed to talk. And so we know one of the things we do is we need more people there on the scene during a disaster like this. Having those type of support people in the hospital, more of them, would be very, very helpful.
We were able to do as well as we did because of the preparation that was done ahead of time. And by that I mean not just before the storm, but is done on an everyday basis in terms of what are the policies and procedures for emergencies, who is in charge, what kind of staff do you have to call in. All of these things are done on the hospital on a regular basis, and that worked very well. The things that went bad is that we clearly as a state, and really I think as a country, do not have a mass evacuation plan for a city of something of this magnitude. I don't think anybody's ever, besides worst case scenarios, that ever thought something like this would happen. We have an Office of Emergency Preparedness for each city and each state, and we have federal organizations like this, but no one talked to each other. And a lot of times that I was down at the Office of Emergency Preparedness, it seemed to be chaotic, and I know the tasks were daunting. So we need to learn from this. We need to be planning actually right now for the next evacuation. You know, it may be a chemical plant in Baton Rouge, it may be another storm, it could be something associated with terrorism. So it would really not be good for us to sit back and not do future planning. We have a lot of rebuilding to do in New Orleans, but we really have to be prepared for this to happen again.
We used to practice something that was called vertical evacuation, and which means that you take the patient either up or down. but you stay in the facility. And I think more and more now, we're actually talking about horizontal evacuation, getting out, and how does that actually play out?
One of the lessons here for any hospital, first of all, is that there are special populations of people that you can't rely on to be treated. You can't just say evacuate patients. You have to have special plans for, certainly for neonates. We also saw a number of patients who'd been on dialysis who really needed to be treated separately. So it's to really look at the individual needs of patients in the context of emergency preparedness that I would really advocate for.
To order a copy of this program, call 1-800-973-7246 or write to Katrina's Smallest Victims, 7730 Road, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, 70810. You can also visit our website at www.lpb.org.
Funding for this program has been provided by the Riley Family Foundation, a leader in providing resources to keep the public informed about health care issues. And by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting, which provides for the enhancement of many LPB programs.